Hello and welcome to this, which is the last of our series of videos on the practical uses of trusts. And today we're talking about trusts, uses of trust for business. And in this course, the focus has been almost entirely on families, talking about issues like asset protection, inheritance, family business succession, and so on. But it's important for us to acknowledge, and that's the reason for this video, that trusts are also used a lot, not just by families, but also by businesses. So what I would like to do is to, a little bit today, give you an overview of how trusts are used in that way. I have to caution you that this is really just an overview, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, the rules and the way that trusts are used around the world in business vary a great deal depending on which particular jurisdiction or which particular country we're talking about and which particular legal tradition. By that I mean in common law countries which have a UK or British base to their legal system, trusts are typically used quite a lot. In civil law countries, continental Europe for example, trusts tend to be used not so much, really for historical reasons because people are not so familiar with trusts. Second reason that this is an overview is that it's complicated. There are really a lot of different uses of trusts, so it's very difficult for us to generalize too much. But the idea today is just to give you a picture of some of the ways that trusts are used to help you understand perhaps the potential for their use more generally. What I can do is I can generalize in this way and say that when we look at trusts in business, the way that they are used, the reasons that they are used, tends to fall into basically two different categories. The first category is what I have here, two categories or subcategories. Sometimes things shouldn't be owned. In other words, sometimes having an individual or a company as the owner of something is not ideal. And in business more particularly, sometimes the owner is not the right owner. So sometimes the legal owner, according to law, is the wrong person. And that is when trusts really become very, very useful. We're going to explain a little bit more about this in a second. Second reason is that sometimes it's really good to have a watchdog. And again, we will explain something about that. But when you look at business trusts, most of them, if not all of them, fall into one of these two categories. So let's start by looking at things that shouldn't be owned. And I'm going to detour away from business for a second. So for those of you who watched some of our earlier videos, you will recognize this house. For those of you that don't, it's a little bit of a mystery game. You'll see here there is a blue plaque on the front of the house, which indicates in the UK that something significant happened in this house or somebody significant lived in this house. But otherwise, you can see it's not an especially magical looking house. What it is it's John Lennon's childhood home. Who is the owner of that? Now, it could be that the owner is the Lennon family, but that puts a lot of responsibility onto the family because this is not just a piece of real estate, it's a piece of, we can say it's a piece of cultural heritage. And in fact, the owner of that house is a trust, and the trust owns that house on behalf of the community or on behalf of all of us, because it's appropriate for that house to be owned, if you like, as community property by us all rather than by one particular person or persons. And when you look at common law countries such as the UK, you'll see this theme repeated quite often. So things like community centres, swimming pools, tennis courts, these kind of things tend to be owned by trusts because they belong to the community as a whole and not to any particular organization and not to the state. They belong to everybody. They belong to us all. In the UK, you can see this taken one step further when you look at things like castles and monuments and pieces of cultural heritage. They have this thing called the National Trust, and the National Trust is a trust, and it owns all of these assets and maintains and protects and looks after all of these assets for the benefit of us all, rather than as an asset that belongs to any particular person. What's this got to do with business, you might ask? And the answer is not much, except that the same analogy applies when we look at family companies or family-based companies. So if somebody, the founder of the family, is the owner of the company, then there are problems potentially with inheritance and with things like inheritance tax. And what we see a lot of companies doing is saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's much more logical for our business or our company to be, or our real estate assets, our castle, to be owned by the family as a whole rather than by any particular individual. Now that works with small family companies, but it also, you will see it working with some very big family companies. One example that springs immediately to mind is IKEA, or if, depending on where you live, how you pronounce it, IKEA. That is owned, it's not a trust, it's a foundation, but it's owned by something, a trust-like structure for exactly these reasons. So you will see trust ownership in business where we're trying to avoid concentrating the ownership into the hands of one particular person or group. You will also see it where there is an owner, but the owner is the wrong owner. And if I take a very simple example, if you look at an investment fund. So an investment fund, typically you have some group of investors who put their money into the fund, and the fund manager looks after that money and manages it on their behalf and returns the profits and the results to those investors. Whose name is it in? Whose name are the investments in? In some countries, you'll find that the name of the investments are held in the name of the fund manager. And that puts a lot of responsibility on the fund manager, of course, not to go bankrupt, and also not to act responsibly and not lose the money. But it's also kind of wrong because the money may be in the fund manager's name, but it's not the fund manager's money. It is the money of the investor or the investors. That's the reason why that in a lot of common law countries, you will see structures such as unit trusts, where there is a trustee. And in those structures, it is the trustee that is the owner of the assets. It is the manager who manages the assets, but it is the trustee whose name is on the bank account, whose name is on the investment certificates, and who signs things. And the trustee does that acting on behalf of the investors to, if you like, own things on their behalf and to protect their interest. And as we lead into the next question, we find that the trustee is there also to act as a watchdog or to protect the investors. So we don't want the wrong owner. The wrong owner would be the fund manager. We can't have the right owner. The right owner would be the investors, but because that would be impractical, so you have the trustee as the owner, but acting on behalf of the investors. Okay. Second reason, it's better to have a watchdog. Now, I'm going to explain this with a little bit of a practical example, which is interesting, I think, in understanding how some corporate relationships work. Here we've got a pub, or maybe it's a restaurant. It looks like it's in a nice location. I don't know where this pub is. And we imagine that the owner of the pub would like to borrow some money. Now, if I'm a private individual and I would like to borrow some money, I go to the bank and I say, hello, Mr. Bank, I'd like to borrow some money. And the bank will usually ask for some security to protect them in case I don't repay the loan. And oftentimes that is a mortgage. So in other words, the bank takes security over my house and says, James, if you don't pay us back, we hope you pay us back. We don't want you to not pay us back. But just in case, we have a mortgage over your house, which means that if you don't pay us back, we can take the house and sell it. Now, in the case of a business, it's a little bit different because you can look at this pub and you can say, okay, there's some things there, but the real estate, in most cases, doesn't belong to the owner of the business. So the business wants to borrow some money. They can't use the real estate as the security because they don't own the real estate. What the bank will sometimes do is ask the owner of the business to provide a personal guarantee or maybe his own real estate as security for the loan, but obviously most people don't want to do that. What the bank may also do is try to take security over the assets of the business. And this is where it gets interesting. So look at the pub and you'll see that we've got a table here, some chairs, a bar, a whole lot of glasses, some equipment, some decorations, these kind of things. And of course the bank can take security over those things. Now back to the mortgage. When I give the bank security over my house, one of the rules is that I cannot sell the house without asking the bank's permission. The same rule is going to apply for these tables and chairs and so on, because the owner of the pub has said, okay, I'm going to give you these things as security for the loan, and the bank will say, that's great, we need to make sure that our security is protected, so you can't sell those things without our permission. Fair enough. But then, when I look on this shelf, I can see here a lot of bottles. And these are bottles of whiskey, of gin, of wine. There is beer in the taps. And these are also assets of the business. But unlike the tables and chairs, we can't say to the owner, don't sell them, because in fact that's the whole point of the business. The whole point is for him to sell those assets. So what the bank will do is they will say, okay, we'll take what's called a fixed charge over the tables and chairs. It means that our security connects directly to that table and that chair, and we'll take what's called a floating charge over the beer and the wine and the whiskey and the vodka. Floating charge meaning that the pub can sell those things. They don't have to ask permission for the bank. But the deal is that when they sell a bottle of whiskey, they should restock, and there should be a constant amount of whiskey and beer and wine in the pub the whole time. And that works most of the time. So, let's look at how does it work on a bigger level. So one of my hobbies, one of the things I like to do is I like to collect old investment certificates. They are beautiful pieces of art, beautifully printed, and they take us back to a time in the past when life was a little bit simpler and less complicated. And here's an example. It's not that old, this one. It dates from the 1970s, 1973. And to explain what's going on here, we have Phillips Petroleum Company who needed to borrow some money. And they needed to borrow, in this case, $1,000. In fact, they wanted to borrow a lot more than that. But they wanted to borrow $1,000 from Lincoln Income Life Insurance Company, and $1,000 from somebody else, and $1,000 from somebody else. Or we can call this a bond issue, if you like. So we have many, let's call them lenders, many investors who have lent the money to Phillips Petroleum, and that investment is secured by a charge over the assets of Phillips Petroleum in the same way exactly as the owner of the pub in our last example. So how do you stop the pub? So the pub, for example, has whiskey, right? It sells some whiskey. The deal is that the pub needs to keep buying more whiskey so that the security of the bank is protected all the time. How do you stop the pub from just selling all the drinks and ending it with nothing and then running away? How do you stop, we talk about in some countries this idea of tunneling. How do you stop the owner of the business from taking all the assets away from the company and then kind of saying, oh, I'm very sorry, nothing is here, bad luck. And in the case of corporate debt such as this, we have many investors who have no ability to keep an eye on Phillips Petroleum, and that is why you will see in these kind of situations that if you look closely at the bottom left, you will see that there is a trustee. And the trustee is doing the same job as the trustee of a unit trust. They are there to keep an eye on Phillips Petroleum, to make sure that Phillips Petroleum is keeping its promises, to make sure that Phillips Petroleum is not selling its assets, and is there to act in the best interest of and to protect the interests of the investor. So they are there as a watchdog. And that's really great. That means that as an investor, I can feel more secure because I know that somebody is looking out for my interests. So here we are looking at corporate debt, but you'll see actually that in common law countries, you'll see very often the word trustee comes up because there are many, many trusts involved in and underlying these kind of structures. In civil law countries, this is less common, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. Okay, what I'm going to do now, because this, as I said, complicated and could spend a long time on this, I'm just going to go through and look at some examples of how trusts are used in business. Example number one, or group of examples number one, is the example we gave earlier, where the trust is a holding structure for the business, as in the case of IKEA or IKEA, where the trust owns something instead of it being owned by an individual. You see this also with what is called voting share trusts, where the shares of a company are owned by shareholders, but the voting rights are held in a trust, so the trust doesn't have any assets. It has only the right to vote, and that's not a person. It's usually a set of rules. So there might be some basic fundamental rules that you want to enforce, and you might say that, for example, the company should never be sold, and the voting share trust can prevent that from happening. Again, we're trying to separate ownership on one side and control of the business on the other side. So that's holding structure examples. The next examples would be what I would call investment examples. We talked about mutual funds or unit trusts. We talked about that already. Pension funds work in the same way in common law countries. I used to work for a bank, and we had a staff superannuation trust. It was a fund, but it was a trust. There was a big pool of money. The contributions from the employees went into this trust. It was a trust, and were invested. And the trustee or trustees of the trust was a board of people who were elected by the staff and chosen by the bank, who managed that money on behalf of the investors. So really it was a real trust structure working to manage an investment fund. Worked really, really well because you have some element of democracy. Securitization is a little bit of a bad word because it was the cause of the global financial crisis a few years ago. But if you do want to package a whole lot of mortgages, for example, together into a single entity which you can then sell, trust is a very good structure for doing that. Next category, what I'm going to call HR. So employee benefit schemes, employee welfare schemes. What's the difference? An employee benefit scheme is a scheme which provides the employees with gym membership, maybe some cottage in the countryside, some holiday funding. Employee welfare scheme is there to help employees when things go wrong. If somebody gets cancer, if somebody has heart problems, if somebody who's an employee needs help. And these things really work very well as trusts because the money is not part of the company. The money is, let's say, off balance sheet. Again, like the employee pension fund, there is some element of democracy. The employees can be involved themselves in managing the money and making decisions about who gets the money. And I would say that in common law countries, a trust is by far the most common way to structure these things. Again, who does the staff cottage belong to? It doesn't belong to the company. That's really quite important. It doesn't belong to any particular individual. It belongs to the staff. And the staff, of course, is a little bit loose because the staff changes, but the cottage stays the same. Share option schemes, especially for startups. If you are starting a new business and you want to give some participation to your key team members, then a share option trust is a really good way of structuring that. Last group I'm going to talk about, not the last group, because, like I said, this is limited only by your imagination. The last group is what I'm going to call corporate. Corporate debt, we just talked about, debentures, this idea of the trustee acting to protect the lenders. M&A, so mergers and acquisition, when one company takes over another company or buys something. It can also be for real estate investment. Somebody buys something, they pay the money, but the seller doesn't get the money until various conditions have been met. So in the meantime, that money will typically sit in some kind of trust and be protected for the interest of both the seller and the buyer, but will be there until the conditions have been satisfied. And if they are not satisfied, then the deal is off and the money goes back to the buyer. Very common use of trusts. The last one is, I think, one of the most interesting and most important from the point of view of consumers, and that is consumer protection. So you want to go to a music festival, you want to go to Glastonbury or something like that, you pay for your ticket. It's not cheap. And of course these things are very popular, so you have to pay for your ticket a long time in advance, and the money is gone. So you paid the money, but you didn't get the thing. You didn't get your music festival, or in the case of a holiday, you didn't get your holiday, or in the case of furniture, you ordered your furniture, but you didn't get your furniture yet. You paid money in advance. That's fine. What happens if the person you paid goes bankrupt? And the answer is, very often in the old days, used to be, oh, I'm very sorry, bad luck. And this is where trusts are really useful, and in some areas they are required by law. So, for example, when you pay for a holiday in the UK, that money has to go into some kind of trust structure, or at least part of that money has to go into some kind of trust structure, and the holiday provider gets the money only when your holiday happens. And it protects you in case that company goes bankrupt in the meantime. In the case of music festivals, it's not a legal obligation, but it's very reassuring for the customer to know that, yes, I'm paying for my music festival, but I know that the organizers won't get the money, or won't get all the money, until the music festival actually happens. So that if, in the meantime, they go bankrupt, I get my money back. And that's a very common, and I have to say, excellent way of using trusts in a business context. Excellent also for the consumers. That's just a few examples. There are really many, many more. I could go on, as I said at the beginning, I could go on for 3 or 4 days on this topic, but it would probably put us all to sleep. So that's enough. Thank you. If you would like more information about the topic, of course, please let me know. That's all today. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you found that useful and helpful. If you'd like to see more of this, please like the video and please subscribe using the button that you can see just there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and thanks again for watching.